Hey everyone, welcome to beautiful frozen North Carolina. This is very unseasonable, so don't be scared, please come back. So today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some modeling work. Don't be scared, it's really interesting. I won't show you math. I have some amazing people that I work with who help me with the modeling part, and I get to just play around with the implications of that, which is pretty cool. So we've had a 3-year project here in southeastern North Carolina where we've been trying to quantify ecosystem services of aquaculture. So I hope this is helpful for you growers out there who are thinking about when you talk about your farm and how important it is, and not just how it brings in jobs and money to your state, but how it also is improving water quality. We can actually put numbers on that, including dollar values. So this is really important when you're talking to managers especially. These are some of the amazing people that I've worked with. Suzanne Bricker there in the top left with my student Jessica. She has been the champion of the farm model and has taught me a lot. And then I've had a ton of amazing students who've been out there in all kinds of conditions, including almost drowning. And then also some wonderful farmers here in North Carolina who've allowed us to access their farms and pull oysters out of their bags. And I know that that is very rare, very special, so I really appreciate it. All right, so we know that oyster farms can remove nitrogen from the water column, right? We've all heard that this is something that oysters do. This is an ecosystem service. But how much do they remove? And this is a problem because humans are increasing the amount of nitrogen entering watersheds. This can result in algal blooms, low oxygen, fish kills. And the sources of this nitrogen could be fertilizer, it could be wastewater, storm water. There can also be natural sources of nitrogen. And we can reduce nitrogen by removing that before it enters rivers, like using wastewater treatment. But once it's there, it's really hard to remove. So it's out there. Think about places where, it's eutrophied, there are algal blooms. It kind of cycles itself through that water column for a long time. Enter the lowly oyster. All right, so ecosystem services are things that we can put a dollar value on. There are a lot of things that oysters provide for us, but there are a few things that we can put a dollar value on, like habitat quality. We can determine how much enhancement of habitat oysters are doing, and then we can also put a dollar value on nitrogen. So models can calculate how much nitrogen the farmed oysters can remove. I don't always trust these things, but I'm gonna try it. For example, in previous studies, it's been shown that 51 to 230 kilograms of nitrogen per acre per year are removed by oysters in aquaculture. Okay, so this is a value because there's a cost to prevent or remove nitrogen pollution. We can scale that up and give it a value. In Great Bay, New Hampshire, this is valued at 150 to 172 kilograms of nitrogen dollars per kilogram of nitrogen per year. That may not mean much, but if you think about it, that's $3,600 to $4,100 per acre of oyster aquaculture per year. So how many acres is your farm? You can scale that up. That's getting significant. And that's in New Hampshire, where it's cold, where oysters don't grow very fast, and it takes them about 3 years to get to harvest size. So how does this work? This is the farm model. Basically, it can calculate farm production, filtration carrying capacity, and the influence on nitrogen and oxygen. We have food coming into the farm on the current, and it cycles through the oysters. It's sort of like the engine of the model. Eat that nitrogen, and then the water passes out the other side. And then we can quantify how much nitrogen is removed. So why North Carolina? Why do we care about it here? We grow a lot of triploids here, as we know. Triploids grow bigger. The current engine of the model as it's running now is using a diploid oyster, so there could be some differences there. We have some intertidal oyster farms here. That gets tricky when you're calculating, sometimes that farm is not underwater, so those oysters aren't feeding all the time, so we might have to calibrate that. The oysters here have really fast growth rates. We know that they can get to market size in 9 months to a year. And the industry is expanding here, so we want to provide data on the costs and benefits. So we worked at 3 different farms in southeastern North Carolina. Here is Farm 1. It's in the Masonboro Island National Estuarine Research Reserve. It is intertidal or shallow subtidal, depending on the tidal range at that time of the month. And this farm had 3 different gear types that we modeled. There are bay bottom cages, lens system, and floating bags. Farm 2, also Masonboro Island Reserve, was very intertidal, uncovered a lot of the time, and this is mostly bottom culture. The oysters were in bags, but on the bottom. And then finally, Farm 3 is in the New River Estuary, a little further north. This is a subtidal system, very different hydrodynamically, and he also had 3 gear types and different seed start dates. So how do we do this? We collected environmental drivers monthly. We measured oyster growth monthly on all the different farms. My student toiled away in the lab and measured the oyster physiology. She calculated the feeding rates, egestion, excretion, respiration for the engine of the model. And then we calibrated the model using all the data that we got from the oyster growers, things like their harvest, their seed size. A lot of data went into this model. So my student Jessica Kinsella gets full credit for doing these experiments and also going out there on the farms every month, pulling oysters out of the bags, measuring them, and counting the mortality. It was a lot of work. She was also our liaison with the growers and chatted with them monthly about any information they could provide about their harvest or if they were splitting bags, things like that. And the idea is that this green is the food coming in, that's energy coming in with the clearance rate, and then all these red are energy going out of the oyster. So your ammonia excretion rate, your egestion rate, and your oxygen consumption rate, and whatever is net is scope for growth. So that is the oyster could grow, and the oyster could turn that nitrogen into biomass, which can then be extracted through harvest. So how did we do? We're calibrating our model. The purple dots here are observed growth rates on one of our farms. This is just an example. You can see that there's a wide variability in growth rates, as I'm sure you all know. That's very common. And then that orange dot up at the top is our modeled growth rate. So we did pretty well. The harvest size of 3 inches was reached within a year, which we know to be true on this farm. So we decided to go ahead and use 365 days as the harvest period for the model. When we use 365 days as the harvest period in the model, then we can look at, okay, what is the size of the oysters on all these different farms at 365 days? So this is like a comparison of the modeled growth rate on these farms. So when we use 2017 data, our Farm 1 and Farm 2 were fairly similar in terms of their shell height at harvest. And in 2018, we had a little bit of a change, but most notably the Farm 3 had the highest growth rates. So then we can extrapolate this out and calculate the nitrogen removed. So if all these oysters are harvested, how much nitrogen is that being removed from the farm? So the nitrogen removed per area of least bottom was highest at Farm 1. Interesting. When you calculate out to the entire farm, the nitrogen removed by the entire farm was highest at Farm 3. And this is just because Farm 3 is larger. So you get your per area nitrogen, and then you extrapolate it out. More nitrogen is being removed by the entire Farm 3. So we're starting to explore why this might be. We know that Farms 1 and 2 have high tidal energy, so there's a lot of flow through those farms. They also had very high seeding density, and we think that this could actually be a large controller of the amount of nitrogen being removed from a farm. So you don't want to have too many oysters in your bag, because you could also end up with a high mortality rate, which is something that we saw on Farms 1 and 2. But it does sequester more nitrogen if you have more oysters on your farm. Farm 3, there is more food in the New River. It's more of a eutrophic system, and it's also a larger leased area. So how do these rates compare to other studies? We have a range here, 51 to 230 kilograms of nitrogen per acre per year from past studies. And the bottom 2 here, you can see Masonboro Island, North Carolina, and New River, North Carolina fall right in range with other studies. Okay, but what about North Carolina? What happens when we think about this statewide? You may not all be from North Carolina, but I bet a bunch of you are. So we can actually take data on the amount of least bottom area in North Carolina. So I grabbed some data from the shellfish sighting tool run by Troy Alphen. You can talk to him about that. And the shellfish sighting tool said, I'm not sure, I need to check, see how accurate this is, but in 2018 there were 1,839 acres of leased bottom, actively leased bottom in North Carolina. So if we scale that up, that's 93 to 422 metric tons of nitrogen per year being removed by y'all's farms. So good job. We can scale that up to people. So how many people equivalents is that? The amount of nitrogen that people put out, if you know what I mean. 28,000 to 129,000 personal equivalents of nitrogen are being removed by oyster aquaculture in North Carolina. And how much could that value be? $1.1 to $1.5 million per year of avoided nitrogen treatment costs. So these numbers need to be refined. We haven't actually used dollar values for how much nitrogen treatment costs here in North Carolina, but when you use a literature value, this is how much it ends up being. So our next steps, what I would love from you all, if you could help, is to help us refine the North Carolina model. So I would like to see how typical these 3 farms are to a variety of farms in North Carolina. I have some flyers that tell you the types of information that we would need if you're willing to have like an hour-long phone call with me and provide me with a little bit of information. We can get you a nitrogen avoidance number for your farm. And that would be something really cool to share with your managers in your area or your consumers. So that is all I have. Thank you so much.
Anybody have any questions for Beth? There's one right here.
That's a great presentation. I was going to ask you, I've heard about people putting bivalves, I've heard about people putting bivalves near like salmon net pen culture to help to protect the salmon from diseases because the bivalves filter the water real well. Are you tuned into that at all, or can you comment on that?
Yeah, so that's an integrated approach, and my collaborator Joao Ferreira is doing that type of modeling. He can put in different types of growth, including fish and bivalves. There are all kinds of modifications you can do to this type of model with the farm model, but I'm not doing it for this particular one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Another quick, sorry. Let's see.
I could probably spoke up.
On the brief screen with the locations, I noticed Potomac, Maryland was kind of off the charts. Made me think immediately, did the amount of nitrogen, the starting point, have any effect, do you think, on the amount removed?
Yes, I do, definitely. And that is something that we hypothesized here too, that there's a lot of food in the water up in Chesapeake Bay. So then there's also a lot of potential for that food to be turned into oyster biomass and removed. So it's kind of a win-win, and when you have a more eutrophic system, you get some oysters in there, they can really have a lot of impact.
We're gonna have to move on.
I think Bill abandoned me somewhere. Somebody else had a question up here.
Yeah, we got to move on though, I'm afraid.